Andy, I know you've never been happier than when you're sitting by a warm fire, snuggled up in a flannel and basking in the glow of an old-school budget spreadsheet.
It is a special day I can shut down the world for a little me time.
In a world full of applications, why do these antiquated documents and spreadsheets still run the world? And why haven't they been updated in over 50 years? That's why we want to talk about Coda.
Coda is a new kind of doc that brings words, data, and teams together. It comes with a set of building blocks that anyone can combine to create a doc as powerful as an app.
Coda runs our entire business here at True Story FM, from show scheduling across dozens of podcasts and scripts for thousands of episodes, to budgets and plans and wikis and more.
Coda lets us see our business in a new light. If you'd like to shine a light on productivity in your business and save money along the way, check out Coda today at thenextreel.com/Coda. It's hard to believe that we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great conversations over the years about so many great movies. All that said, producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes.
Becoming a Next Reel member gives you access to all sorts of additional and exclusive content. Plus, you're helping us keep the lights on. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership, where you can learn more about becoming a member, which costs a measly $5 a month, practically the same as one fancy coffee drink. And you get so much more.
Every month, we record a bonus episode exclusively for members. Those episodes cover movies from whatever series we're covering at the moment, or add to previous series.
Some movies we've covered that only members get to hear us discuss include The Blues Brothers,
The Russia House,
Naked Lunch,
Independence Day,
The Hot Rock,
and Relic, the better one. Plus, members get to vote on what we're going to discuss for those episodes.
We also record additional pre- and post-show content in regular episodes that only members get to hear,
like conversations about similarly themed movies.
And answering listener questions from our live member chat.
Speaking of our live member chat, we record almost all of our episodes in Discord, where members can chat right along with us live.
Members get access to other members-only channels in our Discord community as well. On top of all that, members get all episodes a full week earlier than everyone else in a private Next Reel feed just for them that includes all the shows in the Next Reel family. The Next Reel, the Film Board,
movies we like, Sitting in the Dark, and more new projects on the way.
To top it all off, members don't have to listen to ads. We've already eliminated those annoying, dynamically inserted ads that, let's face it, we all hated.
We are listening to you.
We love podcasting for a living, and those ads help to pay the bills. Now, we're counting on you, dear listener.
We promise we aren't going back to those terrible, dynamically inserted ads that don't relate to us at all. All we ask is that you consider supporting the Next Reel family of podcasts with a membership.
Again, it's $5 per month or $55 per year. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership.
thenextreel.com/membership. Get your access to early, ad-free episodes with bonus content, member bonus episodes, and access to member channels and live streams in Discord by signing up today.
Welcome to Silver Linings, part of the Next Reel family of film podcasts on True Story FM. Have you ever liked or even loved a movie that everyone else just seems to hate? Well, you are not alone, my friend. We look at movies that are often panned by critics and audiences to see if their hate is warranted. Sure, we'll talk about what might be broken, but more important, we talk about what really works in these films, with the hope that we change some minds along the way. Perhaps even yours? So, sit back, relax, and let's take the guilt out of guilty pleasures. This is Silver Linings. Hello, I'm Ray, your eternal optimist.
And I'm Ocean. And on this episode of Silver Linings, we'll be taking a look at the 2003 blockbuster, Daredevil.
I prowl the rooftops and alleyways at night, searching for justice, blind justice, a guardian devil. was 12 years old. I had lost my sight, but I got something back in return. My remaining 4 senses functioned with superhuman sharpness. I could hear a whisper a block away, but the most amazing of all was a kind of radar sense. Soon the world will know the truth.
There is no proof that Daredevil even exists.
That one man can make a difference.
What do you want? Justice.
So, for this episode, we have a very special guest with us. We brought in our local Evanescence aficionado and co-host of the Marvel Movie Minute. Please welcome Mr. Kyle Olsen.
Just being on the show has woken me up inside. I'm so happy to be here because I really have a strong I have a strong connection to this movie in particular. I saw it live in theaters and I've bought it many times on different formats as the years have gone by.
All right. Well, way to jump ahead from the first question there, Kyle, which was how were you personally introduced to the film?
I bought a ticket. Yeah.
So Kyle's already tipped his hand, so I guess I'll go next. The way I was introduced to the film is really the same way. I've always been into comic book movies, and this was especially back at this time when there was a dearth of them. I saw the preview and knew immediately I would be checking it out in theaters. So I saw it in theaters. I think I saw it twice. I saw it a couple times in theaters, and then immediately bought the DVD when it came out.
Nice. Surprisingly, I did not see this one in theaters I'm just shocked thinking about that because I was huge into comics. Daredevil was one of my favorites. I always played as him in the game Marvel Ultimate Alliance.
Yes.
I subscribed.
You had to work to
the
get him
comic.
too.
You did. You had to collect
all his
action figures.
Yeah.
And so after I unlocked him, boy, you better believe I was always playing as Daredevil.
Right.
But I actually didn't see this until my friend Andrew recommended this to me. My friend Andrew actually has a podcast of his own called Zombie Apocalypse.
Shout out.
Shout out. But he introduced this to me, and I actually started out with the director's cut. It wasn't until fairly recently that I watched the theatrical cut and the problematic things that brings along with it.
Which we'll talk about.
Yes, which we'll talk
approximately about. When, do you remember the year that you saw it?
I would say 2005 or 6.
Oh, okay. So fairly recently after it came out, not 2019.
No, it was soon after the director's cut was released on DVD initially. Okay. Just real quick, how familiar are you guys with Daredevil from the comics? Just so that we have an understanding of who knows the history of the character.
Well, just the movie. I'll jump in first there. My familiarity with them revolves around Frank Miller. And so I initially saw that Frank Miller when I was initially introduced to him, was Frank Miller did a little miniseries like The Man Without Fear. And that was the first Daredevil story that I read. I read a few comics here and there as well. I did not like them as much as anything Frank Miller did, so then I went back and read the Frank Miller written comics that he did. And so I saw that and made me familiar with this story. But my entire introduction was really just looking at those pieces, and then after a while, reading some of the other stories of Daredevil after that. But I mean, once you've had the Frank Miller version, the other comic book stories aren't quite as good.
There's those fighting words.
Yeah, well, they're just not. I mean, Frank Miller's the man. So I was somewhat familiar with him, at the time of the movie. But like many people, I guess my familiarity was more than most people. But when this came out, he was really just kind of known primarily as a name. He wasn't the household, you could argue household name that he is now.
Yeah.
True.
How about you, Kyle?
He was actually the first superhero action figure I ever bought.
Wow.
And this goes way back to when I was a kid. I guess when I say I bought it, it's just I convinced my mom to buy it because,
sure.
For those who are action figure collectors, you know what a peg warmer is. And so Daredevil was in the Secret Wars line in 85 or so, and he was a peg warmer. There were plenty of him on the aisles at Toys R Us. And so I actually got him. And I really didn't know who he was because I only read a couple of comics at that time. And I just remember just being endlessly making fun of the fact that he just had a stick. Like his special accessory in the Secret Wars was just a little gray stick, and I was like, "You can't, take that, Doctor Doom! I brought my stick." Okay, well now, as you see the movie, you know what it actually is. It's really, really cool. But at the time, as an action figure accessory, pretty boring. But then, I read a bunch of Marvel comics, but I never read Frank Miller's run. But because Daredevil showed up in everything, I sort of knew what the story was because they're very good at cross-promoting. Stan Lee was a master at that, of like going, you'll find out what happened to Elektra if you read, they'll actually have the little bubble at the bottom. But it wasn't until Brian Bendis' run that I actually got into Daredevil and understood him. When he did his whole thing about Daredevil got his, the Kingpin finally gave up the secret identity. So basically Daredevil was now out. Everyone knew it was Matt Murdock and what that meant and how it reflected in all of his villains and all the people who supported him and everything, like the huge ripples through his life. And Michael Lark did a bunch of that art. It was amazing. And I have that whole run in hardcover. I mean, that's my favorite Daredevil run. And then afterwards, everybody after it got sort of lesser and lesser. like the next person who took over, I think was, I can't even remember now. But everyone took over was sort of like, oh, yeah, that's all right. And then the next person take over and you go, yeah, okay, that's pretty good. And then it sort of went down and I just gave up on it until Mark Waid. And then Mark Waid did a fantastic run on Daredevil for a couple of years. And that was really good. And now actually it's come back around again. So Daredevil is this sort of he's a guy that gets knocked down and then he gets back up again. That's, he learned that from his dad. But that's the way with his comic, too. His comic is terrible for a while, and all of a sudden, somebody else will come in, give him a lot of love, and it'll be fantastic again. So Chip Zdarsky is writing it currently, and it's really, really good. So wait till that run ends, and then watch him get knocked down again. So I had high expectations going in to watch it, because that was right in the middle of that sort of run.
Very nice. Yeah, my introduction to the character of Daredevil was through the cartoons and the games. Oh. I think I actually first saw him in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon whenever he made an appearance. And then when I was in the later years of high school and then going into college, I was hanging out at comic book shops a lot. So I would pick up old back issues of Daredevil and other heroes and eventually started subscribing to Daredevil back in 2007. I don't anymore because that stuff gets expensive.
Yeah. I'm pretty much a trade only and only on Comixology.
So I guess it's fair to say we're all pretty knowledgeable about the character. Ocean.
Well, we are now.
Let's get into the movie. Right?
Yeah. So, when you get into the critical consensus?
I don't like being touched.
Why don't you tell me what you do like? We'll start there.
Okay, so the critical consensus, we'll start off with the Rotten Tomatoes recap, which is always my favorite way to describe a movie. Rotten Tomatoes recap says that while Ben Affleck fits the role and the story is sporadically interesting, Daredevil is ultimately a dull, brooding origin story that fails to bring anything new to the genre. And so and that's kind of made up of some, there's some good reviews and bad reviews. So I'll start with the good reviews. So Richard Roper of Ebert and Roper fame said that Daredevil has electric energy, a wickedly dark sense of humor, some ingenious fight scenes, and that high-powered cast. The Washington Post has a good review, which only sounds backhandedly good, which is it's perfectly satisfactory without being deeply satisfying. So, but that was the positive reviews. And so, looking at some of the negative reviews, reactions that you got from them from this movie was, Newsweek says that it was torn between moody grandiosity and cartoonish mayhem. Daredevil tries to have it both ways and succeeds at neither. And the Sydney Morning Herald.
That was well written. That's a good sentence.
Yes. And the Sydney Morning Herald has a similar theme where it says Johnson hasn't decided if he's making an exuberant action movie or a drama and veers awkwardly between the two. So I think that what you're really seeing there is that, that the consensus seems to be that they were maybe expecting something different than what they had, or were, still, because this is the infancy of the Marvel movies. I mean, even up to and including at the very beginning of it, it's the first time you see what is now the very famous, the Marvel crawl, that the Marvel Studios icon and logo you see with the turning of the pages and the different characters. Mm-hmm. This was the first movie to do the first version of that, right? And so you could see, and I think that it was It's that early in the process. I think that this movie's still being compared, to everything's being compared to Batman at that time because Batman 1989 is still the king of the comic book movies, and so I think that the critics for these things, at least what I'm reading between lines with these, are that they expected it either to be super serious or super campy, and they did not find it to be either.
Sure. Did you guys, speaking of reviews, did you happen to see what Stan Lee had to say about the movie?
Despite making a cameo, I believe he was not a fan of the finished product.
Yeah, I did not. What did Stan the Man have to say?
He had 2 words. Too tragic. And, thinking about the history of the character in the comics, the Stan Lee era, totally too tragic because that wasn't Stan's game. But if you look at the more modern era of the character, it fits.
It does, and I'm surprised by that. I mean, Daredevil is a tragic character, right? His whole, the beginnings of him with having it where he's, he gets his abilities from an accident that blinds him for life, and which that accident happens directly after seeing his father do the worst thing that he thinks he can see his dad do, right? So you're already starting with tragedy, and then you layer on the death of his father, and then he's growing up blind in an orphanage, and so I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot of reasons for therapy here. So I really think that he already is a tragic character, and that the movie really leaned a little bit into that.
Right, and something, Moon Knight always gets compared to Batman, but I would say that Daredevil might be a closer representation to that type of character than Moon Knight. I think there are more parallels between Daredevil and Batman than Moon Knight.
Yeah, you could easily have seen Bruce Wayne deciding to go to law school to try and help people. I mean, that would be a perfectly reasonable Batman reboot. Right. And also, Frank Miller, the 2 characters he's most associated with are Daredevil and Batman. So, I mean, he went one from one right to the other.
Pretty smooth transition, I would say.
Yeah.
So
Batman would have bought the law school.
He probably would have gone to the Wayne family school of law.
He would have just purchased it and been like, I believe I get my law degree now.
Yeah.
And that was it.
So let's go ahead and address some of these criticisms. And one thing that I think that we should address is that most, if not all, of these criticisms were directed at the theatrical version of this movie. And in 2004, the director's cut was released on DVD. It's a half hour longer. It's the version that the director, Mark Steven Johnson, wanted to have originally. And so they are really, really different. And so if the director's cut version is the one that had gone out initially, I doubt that it would have received as much criticism. But let's go ahead and address some of these. So a lot of the criticism came down to people thinking that the movie lacked story.
Yeah, I can see that there's some of that as holistically as far as the story itself, because it's kind of an origin story without an origin, right? Like one of the things I do like about the movie is that when the movie starts, he already is Daredevil.
I agree.
Right? But they do, with the flashback sequences, they go back to his childhood and try to start explaining kind of where he came from, as far as what he went through to get to be where he is now. But at the same time, him already starting there I think it actually helps and aids the story. But from there and beyond there, we can talk about the different beats of the story, which we definitely should do. But I think that the overarching story it really is a good one, especially given that the part of the focus of this movie or goal must have had to have been to introduce this character to a large audience. Because at the time, many people didn't know who Daredevil was, and so you need to have a good, nice, safe movie here to hopefully get a great mass appeal, so you could then eventually make the sequels.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that what suffers the most is that you end up only seeing Matt Murdock as just a guy, and then he's Daredevil. What they cut most of was the lawyer part of it. So it's sort of like that was the other half of that character, so I don't think you get to see him doing investigations and helping people and stuff too. You only can see him running around in the costume. It's sort of like doing a Spider-Man movie and then not having him be in college or high school or have no friends outside of the superhero world. That's okay. Yeah. You can, but should you? And so that ends up what they cut. So it ends up just focusing on just the guy in the red suit running around at night, and then I think that maybe weakens the character a bit.
Yeah. Right. That was the one big difference between the two cuts, is that they wound up cutting the whole story of Matt and Foggy as lawyers working on this case with Coolio.
Poor Coolio. Alas, poor Coolio. He was so good. And they cut him out entirely. He's in one frame of the trailer and then not in the movie at all in the theatrical cut. Ugh.
Well, I'm sure he missed out on his Golden Globe now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really a shame.
Would have been a fantastic voyage, though, for it, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And it's really a shame because Mark Steven Johnson, in talking about, what happened that so much got cut, I'm going to read a quote from him. He said, "I felt responsible to the studio. And, the studio wants that movie to be under 100 minutes and move like a bat out of hell. And you have to have respect that because I feel responsibility for them to do well and to make money. And at the same time, that's at odds with me as a writer and a fan of the comic at the times, because I love Matt Murdock as the blind detective. And a lot of that story that got lifted out. And that was the biggest criticism of the film, that there wasn't enough story."
Yeah, I've actually given that quote a lot of thought, right? Having to, the original, I think the director's cut is about 2 hours or 2 hours and 5 minutes. And then he had to cut about 25 minutes out to get it down to the 100-minute running time, because at the time, it's comical to think of it now, but at the time, the studio
did not think we're at the door of a 4-hour superhero movie?
Exactly. Yeah. So, because studios were like, well, audiences will never sit for 2 hours in a comic book movie. Yes, we will. Heck, Infinity War and Endgame could have been one big solid movie with an intermission. We'd have stayed. Yeah. But so when I've given thought about what the kind of the choice that the director made when confronted with this problem, and the result does create a mixed bag of where you cut out important things, right? You don't get a sense that Matt Murdock is any good as a lawyer. You get the sense that he and Foggy are friends, but it's kind of, there's a little bit of where, okay, I guess they're friends. I mean, they seem to like each other, but you don't get real sense of how important Foggy Nelson really is in Matt Murdock's life. And also, I really think you get a shortchanging of the Elektra romance, right? Mm-hmm. Because their romance is basically they go out on a date, they spend the night together, and then they are apparently somewhat in love, but you don't really get it because it seems to be that didn't it just happen like 2 minutes ago? Like why is all this emotion, right?
And so that's why they cut the love scene.
The director's cut didn't have it. They added it. Right? They added it for the theatrical release because they had
they wanted it shorter, but maybe we can squeeze in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, and the love scene doesn't add, right? It actually the romance actually makes more sense the other way, where you're longer building up the relationship versus having it where they got together and hooked up. It was like, well, Batman did that all the time, and so, that didn't mean he loved him. Really, though, what I think of getting back to the thing, what I think that the choice that they should have made, if I put myself in that situation, I have to cut this movie by 20 minutes. I would have cut his childhood. Right, mm-hmm. Because I really felt that all those other aspects of the movie were far more important than his childhood. You could cover, because his childhood really, at the end of the day, only has the importance of he had an accident, he's now blind, and he has to then move on, right? And you could cover that in a Hulk style credit sequence at the beginning, right? But beyond that, there's nothing really that is important and impactful that is really added to the movie.
I would my counterpoint to that would be, yes, I would agree with a lot of that, but I don't think you can cut his dad. Like, I think that the father-son relationship, that is really important, not only setting up the Kingpin thing, but just that the father was a boxer, a fighter, and that, he was killed in front of him, like that sort of, that's I think, intrinsic to the origin. But I'm not saying you couldn't have condensed that down to, him, a 5-minute, voiceover as you showing a little clips of the thing, and then you move on.
Yeah, but I think that some of the impact of that you get without having seen it, because you don't actually see it, right? Because so even in this movie, we can break down that part, right? With the Kingpin kills his father, right? He doesn't even know that until the end.
Right.
So that's to the end of the movie. So that has nothing to do with his origin at all. He knows his father was killed at a young age, around the corner from where he was. He was a boxer, and that matters some. But at the end of the day, as far as with the movie goes, you could really just cover that. He could cover that in a throwaway line. Yeah, my dad was a fighter. Okay, and then we move on, right? You don't need all this exposition and story of the childhood because it's really superfluous to the rest of the movie, right? And so you could just start him out as Daredevil. He's then working through, you give him the case, because then you have a better idea of, hey, you know what, he actually maybe is a good lawyer, right? Because in the movie you don't know, right? And you give him the case, you give him the relationships, and you make a fuller movie. And the childhood stories, that they were put together in a fashion of, okay, well, his father was a fighter, his father did something that was bad, he got in an accident that made him blind, right? But other than that, it's just not really adding that much. And I think that you could I think the best product is the whole movie, right? I like that the best. But if I have to cut 20 minutes, I think that you can cut the childhood and you still have a great movie.
Okay.
I would watch that cut. Daredevil, the ocean cut.
Exactly. Yeah, he's an adult the whole way. And then he just talks about it. But,
yeah, they weren't ready for that in 2003. Like, we have to know. Like,
you do have some great ideas there, though. I mean, I like the whole idea of doing an Incredible Hulk style opening credits sequence and just having that there and having enough time to focus on the character in present day, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a great idea. But I think also, to Kyle's point, it's also an interesting storyline to see that introduction to the character, his origin story. And I think David Keith is terrific as Jack Murdock.
No, I agree that the father-son story does have an impact, right? There is the aspect of where, especially when the father decides he wants to try to turn his life around, and he's basically been was he an enforcer? So he's an enforcer guy to collect money for the mob, and then he decides he's going to take the tragedy of his son, which is an interesting choice. Take the tragedy of your son instead of drinking yourself into oblivion because he was already a functioning alcoholic because he hated himself, but to use that to then turn around to say, I'm going to improve my life and become the example that I want my son to see, right? Mm-hmm. And then when he's, rises up, he comes back to fighting, he's making an honest living, he's starting to become a better person, and then those same influences come back and try to get him to then, in essence, betray what he's been working towards with his son, as far as, being a stand-up guy. And so he doesn't do it, and he's then killed for it, right? And I could even make an argument that whole little section could be a nice little movie in and of itself. Mm. However, at the same time as all of that I just said, I think that within this movie, when you look at the whole thing in total, if I have to cut 25 minutes, that's the 25 minutes I cut. Because it makes it where the rest of the movie fits and flows in a much better fashion. Whereas that movie, you could even make that, Daredevil 1.5. Like, it's the prequel. We're just, have that kid have a bigger starring role and give him a whole movie and let the whole thing, go to when his father dies, and maybe that's the end, or it ends there, and then the ending credits are like, Stick is waking him up and he's 13 to start training him, right, or something like that. But
could be as good as young Hannibal.
Exactly. Yeah, but yeah. So, but I think that it would be better. The movie would have worked better cutting that versus what they did do.
It's almost a shame that this wasn't made during the MCU era, because they could have even made the origin story a one-shot that they, the one-shot little films that they put with the Blu-ray extras. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about, Ocean?
Yeah.
Yes, no, I do. But if this was made during the MCU era, they wouldn't have had to cut any.
Well, that's true, too.
Yeah, they would have given them the time. Yeah. They're like, 2 hours? Psh, you got any more?
Exactly.
I think the other really big criticism was that it's kind of dull, boring, and depressing. What do we have to say on that?
Clearly they did not know Daredevil. I mean, this guy who saw his dad as an enforcer, his dad was beaten to death, he lost his sight, he had to grow up in Hell's Kitchen, which we're told is the worst area of the Marvel New York. The terrible, horrible things that he's, I was going to say seen, but I will say experienced growing up in that area.
I see what you did.
Plus a healthy dollop of Catholic guilt. I mean, the only time I think we see Matt Murdock smile is when he meets Elektra. He is a dark, brooding character. He is a gothic character. He is a noir character. Like there's never going to be a happy sunshine, musical montage Daredevil. That's just not the character.
Well, they tried to throw that in with the fight scene on the playground.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the foreboding, the darkness really complements the character. We were talking earlier about how this is kind of the Marvel answer to Batman. And I know that this might not have been originally what Stan Lee envisioned for the character, but it works. It works really well. And the opening shot of this movie, to me, is proof of that, because after those great opening credits where it transforms the words from Braille into lettering, we have that shot. It's the close-up of the stained glass window, and then you see that trickle of blood. Camera pans upward to show a bruised and bleeding Daredevil leaning against the cross on top of the church, which is reminiscent of, now I can't remember, is it Frank Miller's or is it Kevin Smith's?
It's Kevin Smith's. Yeah, that's
Guardian
a joke.
Guardian Devil.
Guardian
Okay,
Devil. Yeah, that's a Joe Quesada image right there.
So that image, and I mean, it was a great comic book cover, but to see it on the screen was beautiful. And I know it might sound silly of me to say something from the movie Daredevil looked beautiful, but I stand by it.
Oh no, I think that we'll talk about this as we get more deep into it. But the reverence that Mark Steven Johnson shows for the comic books is really, really evident, and a lot of it, because even at this time we were used to just like, yeah, okay, comic books, we got the idea, we're fine. Like, Tim Burton is famous for saying, I have never and will never read a comic book, and he's the guy that did 2 Batman movies. Okay, you're a filmmaker, fine. Feel free to gatekeep, Tim. But like not only in the images, like the first major shot we have is straight out of a comic book, which already is a signal to us as comic book fans, like, oh, you're taking this seriously, like as an adaptation, not as now he's mine. Like, this is my Daredevil, not your Daredevil anymore. And then the tons of references along the way. I mean, like, it's very, very reverential towards it also trying to tell his own story at the same time. Does it succeed? Well, that's what we're here to find out.
What do you think, Ocean?
Honestly, I think that with these comments, it really made me start thinking of another part of the movie, right? Because I, kind of said a lot already about what I think of the story, but I think that, part of, or at least for me, goes hand in hand with the reverence that they're having with the comic book character itself. It's a Frank Miller story that we're being told here, and then you're right, it opens up right with with that shot, and it really does start to say that, hey, we're going to really stay true to the comics. But I guess to me, part of what I think also to give him a tip of the hat to, or give the director a tip of the hat to, was the decisions about how they were able to portray the way Matt Murdock sees the world, right? The scene right after when he's blinded as a child and he's in that hospital room, right? When they start doing the radar effects, where it's kind of blurry, but you can sort of make things out. It's very discombobulating, because you don't know, with the sounds of the cars and jackhammers and the people, that you can't tell that they're not in the room, but they're outside of the room, and just kind of how. To really demonstrate that aspect of things, and to make it where we're going to take a blind character and bring you into his universe enough to make it where then further on down the road, when he starts doing these things, that you have a visual idea or representation and can go with how is he seeing, in quotes, right? And this, how his radar looks, and the way they visually portray that. And what I thought was really an amazing thing, because in the comics, a lot of Daredevil it's in his head, right? What you're reading as a reader are his thoughts, and that's kind of what you're using to navigate and go along with the storyline. And I think that that doesn't always translate to a movie unless you want to have a lot of narration. which is hard to do a lot of narration, right? And so I think that they, stay not only true to the story, but also by making this great and wonderful choice, allowed us to then kind of be with the Daredevil and kind of go with him on the ride and not look at it like, well, how is this blind guy doing that?
Right. And so I'm going to use that point right there as a segue, and let's get to what this show is all about and talk about what is good about this movie.
Time to give the devil his due.
Why is this movie worth revisiting? And for me, the number one thing, the very first thing that pops up in my mind is the sound design. And Ocean already mentioned the scene for me, which is the most memorable in this movie, I think. And that is whenever young Matt Murdock wakes up for the first time and he's blind. And the very first thing that happens is you hear this sound. Sounds like a bomb going off. And it is frightening. It is terrible. And it turns out it's just a drip from an IV. And then he slowly starts to have all the other sounds from within and without the room, like Ocean said, coming at him. And it's just it is just a bombardment on his senses and ours too. The sound design team on this movie did a phenomenal job.
Yep, I agree not only with what Ocean said, but with what Ray said too. Like, because it's the two hand in hand, because it's like you need to have that sense. And I cannot think of a better way for them to do the radar sense than the way they did it. And then also that first thing, experiencing that as he's experiencing it, what the heck is going on? And then trying to like distinguish and determine it. Because I always think that that's the power they don't really talk about with Daredevil, is the fact that he can filter. Like, he has all these answers, but it means that he's doing that all the time. He's listening to everyone's heartbeat at the same time, and every traffic and every television that's on at the same time. But he can actually like turn it down and like decide what he's going to focus on. Like, how can he ever have a conversation with a person when there's 1,000 things going on around? That's the true superpower. Focus.
Very true. Very true. So there's the sound design. Another thing that I really love in this movie, and Kyle, like everyone's stealing my thunder today. No, but Kyle, you mentioned that this is very much a love letter to the comic books. And I think that there are just some remarkable shots and scenes in this movie that look stunningly beautiful. I already mentioned the scene at the beginning of the movie. I'm also a huge fan of some of the character designs and the production design. And there is so much detail when you look through this movie. One of my favorite details, and it is so small, and I'm probably going to sound really stinking dumb, but one of my favorite details is at the beginning of the movie, whenever you meet Jack Murdock, is his cauliflower ear.
Oh, yeah.
And I just love the fact that, who cares whether or not he would have cauliflower ear in the movie, but just the fact that they took that extra step with the makeup and did that just, to me, shows a level of commitment that the filmmakers were willing to commit to.
Yeah, I agree. I watched a little of the documentary that was put out on the DVD, and they had to fight for that costume, because you have to remember that, for those of you young people listening to this, I've become the elder statesman of geek. Kids, back in my day, we had one Batman movie and we liked it. Is that studios were terrified of superhero costumes. They were terrified of them. So they, like, if you watch the first X-Men movie, that's why no one wears their costumes. They're all in black leather, because that's as far as they would let them go. And so they talk about, in the documentary for this movie, one of the producers says he had a 40-minute conversation with the heads of whatever, Fox or Marvel, whatever, about the color red. They watched a 5-second teaser that they put together of like basically been in the costume, like firing the grapnel, and they watched it over and over again, and then they had to debate, like, well, when we're talking red, is it like bright, like dark red, like and they had to come together what the red would be. So they had to fight just to have him not wearing black leather. So the fact that we even got a slightly red costume for him was a huge victory. So even listening to Mark Steven Johnson talk about what he had to go through, he's like, you guys don't understand how long I had to fight for the horns.
Oh,
the people are like, oh, it's not spandex, it's not red. He's like, guys, I spent 4 days just getting them to approve horns.
Oh man,
it was a very, very different world. And Spider-Man, I think, was one of the things that benefited them, because 2002, Sam Raimi comes out and says, full-on costume, red, blue, webs. It's the costume, and everyone loves it. And so from that they went, oh, people like comic movies and they like costumes. Oh, okay. And so they actually bumped up Daredevil's budget because of that. Going, oh, maybe these guys are onto something.
Right.
Wow. Could you imagine if they wanted to go with the Daredevil costume that was yellow and red?
Yeah, right? Right? That's the thing. It's like when Stan talks about it, like, I'm like, oh, yeah, well, you put him in yellow, so yeah, you had a very different concept. And I think it was yellow in shorts, wasn't it? Like, they went to the knee.
So it was like Iron Fist, right?
Yeah. I think it was short sleeve and short, like it was like almost like a wrestling onesie.
Yeah.
And then the yellow mask.
The red costume is better.
Yeah, red costume's better.
Yeah,
for sure. What did you guys think of the other characters and their designs, or just anything about the characters, really?
I'll like this one. Let's talk villains.
You think that's horrible, don't you?
Yes,
let's do it.
I think that you really have of the two villains. So I'll start with Bullseye, Colin Farrell. Colin Farrell is Bullseye. I think Bullseye is a great choice as a bad guy in the movie. I think that he's, from an acting perspective, Colin Farrell's performance is nice and over the top, and really kind of in the theme of what this is about, like what a flamboyant bad guy would be in this universe, right? And the other part of what I really liked about the choice of Bullseye is that when you really break down the movie, Bullseye is better than Daredevil, right? He's a better fighter, right? Yeah. He's a better fighter. He's a pro. He's gonna anything he throws, either throws or shoots or whatever that he's gonna hit. He really is truly a great match for our hero, because it's not like one of those. A lot of times, especially back in those days, villains were much more of they're not as good as the heroes. The heroes are just holding back because they're nice people. And with Bullseye, it's like, no, he can't hold back because Bullseye's better. And so I think that the performance was great with it. What they did with him, how he set through the story, the way they executed the different things that Bullseye did really worked in the film. And even up to until, like, you can see when, ultimately when Daredevil defeats Bullseye, really he is forced to use all of his senses to do so. He couldn't beat him. He wasn't beating him in a straight fight. Really what he did is he had the ability to hear that there was a sniper, 500 yards away, and he was able to move, in accordance with the bullet to then get it over for his hands, right? All of that is really taking on all of these extra senses that you have that Bullseye doesn't have, because in a straight fight, or even in that, when they're in the cathedral fighting, when they're on the rooftop fighting, anytime they fight, Bullseye wins every time, right? Because he's better. And I think that was a great choice, not only of the villain they chose, but the way they chose to execute it, to really demonstrate how good and formidable, really, Bullseye was.
Yeah,
right.
And people criticize him being like way over the top, and it was sort of like, have you read the comic? But because there are, I mean, obviously the answer is no, but there are different kinds of Marvel villains, if we're just sticking in the Marvel thing. Doctor Doom has an agenda, and he has these things he believes. Magneto has all these different beliefs, and like he's going to execute them. Bullseye just exists to kill people. Like he's not. There's no difficult backstory. There's no. They've tried to do that kind of stuff, and it just never works because he's just a guy that throws things really fast and likes killing people, and that's fine. So I actually found a quote from Colin Farrell about this, about like how he chose to do his portrayal, and he said, this is from Comic Book Resources, so you can find this online. They say this is at the time, so this is like during the press tour. They say, in this movie, you're playing an unrelentingly bad villain. Did you work on finding the human side of the villain? Not this time. I mean, I'm not going to do his Irish accent, but I'm a great man for trying to find shades in characters, different layers, and all that BS that actors talk about. I'm a great man for that. But this time was just a chance for me to check my sanity at the door and have a field day. Not worry about a dead father or a prisoner of war camp or finding out who the killer is. Not worrying about anything past or future. Just worrying about being exactly in the now and dealing with it. Bullseye was great. He was so black and white. There were no shades of gray. He was just an insane assassin and derived so much pleasure from his work as a killer. He's like a cat with a ball of thread. In the fight with Elektra, that's what I mean. He's on top of the world when he's just having a fight with Elektra and he's just toying with her like she's a piece of thread. Oh, and then just as one last thing, because I love the answer here. Did you ever feel like you were in danger of going over the top? Absolutely. I thought I was doing it every day, and I saw the film and I'm like, oh my God, I'm ridiculous. But you do the work and you do the best you can and hope that someone will think it's okay.
And you know what? That is, to me, one of the best things about this movie is that character particularly and the campiness of him.
Yeah.
Because, granted, I say this with hindsight being 2020, and I'm saying this 18 years after the fact, but this is not a dark villain that is just too serious for his own good. This is not your typical DCEU, like brooding. This is camp, and it works here.
Yeah. It is heightened reality. Beautiful. That's what people need to understand, that this is not supposed to be normal the world. This is comic book world. Things are up on everything.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that they let him use his own accent.
Yeah. For the first time in American movies.
That was a lot of fun because being somewhat familiar with this character, so used to him having like this really in-your-face Bronx accent. So it was a nice change of pace, and it works.
Yeah, it was. And it doesn't matter in the movie that he's from Ireland, because he's an assassin for hire who enjoys killing people. If he's from Ireland or if he's from New York, what difference does it make? So it gives you the great opening sequence when you first introduced him, where he's in a bar drinking a Guinness. You have a little bit of House of Pain playing in the background, and he's winning the darts. I think it really adds to everything that he would, to let him speak in his own voice.
The only thing I did not like, as we praised the sound department, I'm going to then condemn them on the other hand, is I like the coat. I like the fact that he's got this cool coat because he uses it in combat and stuff too. So you don't know where the hits are coming from because he's also using that. But every time he swings the coat, they drop in the sound of a rattlesnake. And it drives me crazy because it's so obvious. I think a couple of weeks ago on SatMat, they talked about the least favorite sound effects, and there's remember them talking about they add in Mask of Zorro, they add the lion's roar every time something explodes, and it's like once you're aware of it, you go, ugh. And so the same thing every time Bullseye would do something awesome into it, and then he'll turn to it and flip the coat, and they go. I'm like, oh, guys.
Well, now I'm never going to not notice that.
Yeah. Welcome to my world. I've shattered the glass.
Yes. You've ruined the illusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a cicada. All right. All right. So I guess since we're on the topic of villains, let's talk about the other primary villain in the movie, which is the
Elektra.
Exactly. I thought she was going to be a villain in the movie, but it turns out not. She was not. So, but the king, and we can talk about Elektra next. But the Kingpin.
Right.
When we talk about the main villains, all right. Here is really one of my, one of my two problems with the movie, and it's really with the Kingpin. The problem that I had with it is the choice of Michael Clark Duncan to be the Kingpin, and that reason is because he, as an actor, is too likable, right? You just don't ever feel that the Kingpin is really all that evil, right? And they don't do enough even in the movie to make you hate him, right? Because if you look at the movie, what does he do? He kills Jack Murdock, which you don't even know about until the end, right? And then he orders the death of Elektra and her father, and that's the list, right? So at no point in time does he do anything through his actions that rises to the level of, oh, well, this is a menace and only Daredevil can stop him, so he needs to be stopped.
Well, he did murder 2 people on screen.
He ordered
on a whim.
the murder.
No, his guards, his 2
Right.
bodyguards.
That's
One of them
in
had
the-
betrayed him, so he kills both of them.
That's in the director's cut.
Oh, it's in the director's cut?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
that's not in the
true. That's
theatrical
true.
release.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So yeah. So and honestly, I think part of the so part of the conversation with all this to me is I'm just going off with the theatrical release, and then we can talk about the difference in the director's cut. Yeah, but that scene isn't in that scene is there, but even in that scene in the director's cut. But what I'm getting at is that he still doesn't do anything, even if you would include that, he doesn't do anything where you're like, oh, he's a massive menace to the city and needs to be stopped, right? Because the Kingpin is a mob boss. He has his fingers on all different pies. He's definitely doing things that are, throughout, he's taking advantage of the vices of the city, and he's definitely hurting people everywhere. Where in this movie, he's really not. And then when you compound that to that they chose Michael Clark Duncan, who I understand why they chose him, right? He's built like what the Kingpin's built like in the comic books. He's a big guy. He has that nice, deep, burly voice, right? But part of the problem too is, of course, you've seen him in other things, and he's likable. And he doesn't do much of anything in this movie to make you really hate him, right? And that to me was like, well, that to me was one of my main problems with the movie was when Daredevil's stopping Bullseye, you're cheering, you're with him. Yes, this guy needs to be stopped. When he's stopping the Kingpin, you're kind of like, well, I mean, can't we just maybe put him on probation for a few bits? I mean, he ain't really that bad, right? He didn't really do that much, and so that to me was my impressions of what I thought of the Kingpin.
I totally get that. Because at this point in time when this movie came out, I would assume most people's experience with Michael Clark Duncan would have been from The Green Mile, and which drastically different role, polar opposite. But I would say, though, that I think that his being in this movie helped it than probably any other actor would have, because I think the problems that you are laying out here are more so with the writing than the actor. And I say that because when you actually break down what's going on in this movie, he is in this movie the blandest guy here. He's not doing much of anything. He's just there, and he's talking, and he's technically, I guess, setting things in motion, but things that just seem trivial. He's responsible for the death of Elektra's father. And ultimately Elektra, and like you said, he murdered Jack Murdock, but all we really know about this guy is that he's a mob boss. We don't know of anything specific he's doing. Within this story, there's no specific plan or scheme that he's trying to get away with that Daredevil has to stop. So it is kind of hard to hate this villain, but I think it's more so because he's not really doing much of anything. I think that Michael Clark Duncan did a great job because, yes, I think you're right that he is a likable guy. He is a likable person. And when you first see him, it's kind of like, oh, this dude's awesome. And then you see him do some of these despicable things, especially if you watch the director's cut. Kyle mentioned the scene where just on a whim, he turns around and chokes out his 2 guards, which is a crazy scene. But I think that it kind of puts you on the fence where you don't know what to think about this guy. One minute, he's this charming businessman, and the next minute, he's a raging bull. So I think that to that extent, he did well with what he had. But I would blame the problems with this character more so in the writing, personally.
I would agree with that. I mean, he does a great job, for what he's given, but he wasn't given a whole lot. I would say that actually probably would be the better thing to cut. Like, keep them talking about Kingpin, worried about Kingpin, what's Kingpin up to, and never show him. And basically, like, keep it as he's out there somewhere. He sent Bullseye to kill. He did all these things, but we still don't know who he is. And then save that for the sequel, rather than this way, which they try and like do too much. They're trying to do too much in this course of it.
That is not a horrible idea right there. And so, yeah, I agree. I agree that the leveling of, if you're looking for the blame for my quibble with this, if you were to level it more at the writing than at the acting, I agree with that. I don't want to provide the impression I think that Michael Clark Duncan is doing a bad job of acting or his performance is
No, and I didn't mean to imply that you were saying.
I just think that the problem is you like him, right? And even with him doing everything he's doing, you still just like him. And that to me is the problem, is that you can't have a bad guy that when the movie's over, I'm like, hey, let's go out for drinks.
Right.
And so
this is in a way, this is my problem whenever Sandra Bullock tried to do gritty crime dramas. I was like, no, sorry. Like, I don't buy you as a tortured alcoholic detective or whatever. Like, you're Miss Congeniality. I'm sorry, but I like
you're Gracie Lee Freebush.
Right, exactly. Like, it's like, I know you might hate doing that stuff, but you're so good. And so, like, every sort of like Murder by Numbers, or whatever, where it's just like, what's the killer doing? I'm like, oh, come on.
I also want to say that I love the fact that this is the man they cast as Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, who is traditionally a very large white man. Mm-hmm. And I found this interesting. I discovered that apparently they originally wanted to create the character of the Kingpin in the comics as an African-American character. But ultimately they decided not to, because it was during the 60s and they were trying the civil rights movement was in full swing. And they said, this probably is not the right time for us to make a character who would make the African-American community look bad in any way, because that's not what we're about. And I think it's pretty cool that, when this movie came out, they came back and they cast this character as an African-American, and he did great in the role. As a matter of fact, he even came back and reprised the role as Kingpin in one of the cartoons. Mm-hmm. I don't remember which one, but
I think they're all called Spider-Man. So let's just say the Spider-Man.
Spider-Man something or other.
Yeah.
I would really like to see what he would have done if his character and his character's motivation had been better fleshed out in this movie.
Yeah, you get to see just a glimpse of that when he says business. It was all just business. Like, you get to see sort of his whole expression change. I'm like, oh, there is more there, but unfortunately.
Right. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Rest in peace. God, that guy was amazing.
Yeah, no, he was great. He was a great actor. I liked him. I enjoyed a lot of his work.
I'm not the bad guy, kid.
Okay, and so just into other characters. So Elektra. This is she's probably the character that I have the least to say about as far as what she did. Right. I think Jennifer Garner was fine. My vision of Elektra is, of a dark-haired Greek woman, that is kind of darker and a bit more brooding than what Jennifer Garner is, because she's very, girl next door, very, and so it was a different, definitely different look than what I was expecting when I was going to see the movie. But at the same time, she does a fine job. She does a decent job of, the different emoting, and really I think is also doing a good job with the material that she's been presented with, right? Mm-hmm. Right. That, because look, the playground fight scene, there's a cuteness to it, but we can make fun of that all day. Right. Yeah. There's a lot of that where it's like, I get the idea that you were going for here, but the execution just seemed a bit odd. Right. But that, and so I think that, and her character is the one that I think suffers the most from the cut of the director's cut to the theatrical release, right? Mm-hmm. Because in the theatrical release, while she does gain an attachment to Matt Murdock and everything, and then gets upset and then becomes where she wants to then avenge her father's death and everything, which is, it's understandable. Your father just got killed in front of you. You may want to avenge that, right? But her relationship with Daredevil and kind of how she is, really fighting her own demons to then become, kind of like, hey, I can have another person that I'm with. I'm not alone in this world, or alone in the world, and I can have a partner and all that. That in the theatrical release doesn't make a lot of sense, right? It seems very ham-fisted and ham-handed. Where in the director's cut, their relationship is much more. There's more scenes, more interactions, and that you can kind of see that the connection for them is much more psychological and emotional. Where in the theatrical release, it seems to be only physical. Right. And I think that's where the character of Electra really suffered from the two different versions. But in either case, I thought that it was very well done, not only the leading up to, but getting to the fight with Bullseye, right? That it was, she was, competently fighting him, but then also at the same time allowed it to where they demonstrated really two things. One, that Bullseye's a better fighter. And then, two, her death scene and everything, it had a nice dramatic effect. And then it set up the Electra movie.
And we're all the better for that.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh boy, that one. Yeah, I agree. First of all, I just love Jennifer Garner. I think she's fantastic. Ever since the first episode of Alias, I was like, who is that? Yes. And so I've had a crush on her since then, and it has not gone away. And so she's one of the few people who looks competent doing the things that they ask her to do. I mean, there's so many of these the actresses that they do that can't even throw a punch, and that they keep casting them in action movies, and it's like, oh honey, you'd have broken your hand there. So Jennifer Garner taking her dance training, I think this is what she's done. She's done ballet and things in the past, and you can see that in sort of how Electra moves. But even when they had the stunt coordinator that had worked on Matrix and Charlie's Angels, and like he had nothing but great things to say about her because he said she did the work. And that's really what they want to do. Like, she really put in the time, and she can handle those sighs like a pro. Like, there's the whole thing she talked about how she, like, basically she was in the marching band, so she did the same drills she used to do, and so she, like, learned to spin this way, then spin that way. And so by the time she showed up, you could give her a set of sighs now, and she can still do them. I think they even wrote them into an episode of Alias just so she can show off her sigh skills eventually. But yeah, I think she's great. I feel bad for her because she was so sort of new to the business at the time. There was one unfortunate incident on the set that you can still see in the final movie. So when she is having her fight with Bullseye, as they're having the big confrontation, and Bullseye's pulling her close, Colin Farrell thought it would be a really, really cool thing if he bit her bottom lip. So in one of the scenes, as they're like really close, he bites her lip.
I thought he was kissing her.
Yeah, that would have been much better. But no, he actually bites her lip, and he does. And then apparently, she said, despite her fact going like, "Hey, could you not do that?" He did it every single take. And now, if you watch the movie, you can see her lip is swollen by the time he actually gets up to do that because of how many times he kept biting her lip. So, like, Colin, come on, man, like. What a jerk. And then, unfortunately, because she's, the new girl on the block, she couldn't be the one to say, hey, is there someone who could, like, stop him from doing this? Because that would be great. Yeah. So she's paid her dues,
Man, yeah. I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah. I don't know if Colin's ever apologized. I know he's a much different person now than he was then. This was party Colin at the time. Like, he was notorious Hollywood, going around, seeing all the sights and doing all the things that young Hollywood does. Now he's a much more calm, relaxed person. So I'm sure, like, now he would be like, oh, did I do that? Ooh, sorry.
I agree with Ocean wholeheartedly on this point, because I also agree that Electra this is the one character who suffered the most from the changes made to the film. And it's a shame because Jennifer Garner, I have such a crush on Jennifer Garner. That opening, the scene where you first see her walk into the coffee shop, and like Ocean likes to say, the wind machine shop. I mean, I dare you not to fall in love with that woman in that scene, because that takes my breath away. And that scene, and also the scene where, and this might only be in the director's cut, I can't remember, but the scene where they're on the rooftop and it starts to rain, and he finally gets to see her in the rain because the raindrops are hitting her face. And
I think that's in the actual cut.
It's in both versions. The director's cut is a longer scene.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Because then they reprise it at the funeral, which is
right,
very good moment.
Because he gets the necklace with the braille.
Yeah. Well, then she puts the umbrella up to stop him from seeing her face.
Right.
That's like a nice, like, ooh. Yeah. Cold-blooded.
That is, to me, one of the better character scenes in the movie because it seems like a genuine, tender moment between these two. And it might even have been the real-life chemistry between Ben and Jen. Who knows?
Yeah.
But it worked, and especially for that character.
Sorry, J-Lo.
Yeah.
I think they were broken up by then.
I think they were still together at that point because they did not...
We really left the topic of the movie at that point.
Well, when we talk about Ben Affleck,
Exactly.
we're going to get into that stuff.
Yeah, which really hot woman was Ben Affleck with at that point in time?
Yeah, I apologize if that's the way it was taken. I don't mean it would be like that. But
Well, speaking of hot women...
But let's feel bad for Ben Affleck.
yeah, speaking of hot women, let's talk about Ben Affleck. Was that your transition?
That was my transition. No, speaking of hot women, do you know who almost got this role?
I don't.
Jolene Blalock, who played T'Pol in Star Trek Enterprise.
Yeah. Okay.
I would have, and I could totally see that. I could totally see that.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's kind of a rabbit trail. But I honestly I can't really think of that much bad to say about Jennifer Garner in this movie. Like you guys said, she did well with what she was given, regardless of some of the action scenes that took place on.
And she hates sand almost as much as Anakin Skywalker.
Nice. So speaking of leading men, what did we think of our man Batffleck?
Ben Affleck?
I think that Ben Affleck did a good job with the role. I think that some of the things that they did even early on in the character, I think were well done. Like in the beginning of the movie, they do show a little bit more about the mundane part of being blind. He seems to kind of portray that pretty well on screen. Showing the mundane parts of folding money. There's folding money, and then also they put the cherry on top of the cake with the demonstrating the coolest way for a blind man to open a combination door, right? And so they have that scene in there. But I think that, and beyond that, he does a decent job as far as being our straight man throughout the movie, right? Mm-hmm. He's able to pull off the fight scenes well enough. That he's believable there. His size and physical presence is also all believable, and he's also able to. He puts a pretty good job on trying to capture both ends of Matt Murdock. I think he does a better job at the regular part of Matt Murdock's life, like where Matt Murdock is really trying to be more of a human than dealing with all of the tortured end of Matt Murdock's life, right? So he does. I think he's better at the first half than the latter, but overall, I think he does a really good job. And I think that there's while you can have. Some people have a lot of criticisms of this movie. I didn't see a whole lot that was criticizing his performance specifically, and also I don't see why you would, right? He was the hero of the movie. He looks like the hero of the movie, and he did a really good job with it.
Yeah, he is a good leading man. I mean, that's why I got it. But I think it's also interesting to think of where he was at in his life, because this isn't Goodwill Hunting, Armageddon chasing Amy Shakespeare in Love Ben Affleck. This is Pearl Harbor paycheck Geely Ben Affleck. So he was not exactly on a hot streak at the time. I think that he sort of was just on the wane a bit before he would sort of have a phoenix-like rise, like the giant tattoo that's on his back. So I think that we're kind of seeing him like a little bit, stretching out from the Hollywood system and fighting a little bit. I think he's better in scenes with other people than he is on his own. Like the sort of the narration monologue, sort of like even growling at bad guys thing. Yeah, okay. Like it's all right. But like him and Favreau are fantastic together. Like there's such a great chemistry, and him and Jennifer Garner are great together. He doesn't get a lot to do with Michael Clark Duncan because they're mostly just like, alpha mailing at each other, but like he's really good in a scene with people. I find more than like when he's just by himself having to like, I have to go, those kind of like he doesn't necessarily pull off the tortured hero thing as much as like, let's say the name we have not said so far, Charlie Cox can do. That he does. But I still think he's great. I think he does a great job, and I think he's a really good Matt Murdock. I mean, that's the thing, is like, as we've seen only 2 or maybe 3 if you count the Death of the Incredible Hulk appearance when he had the black spandex. He's a really good.
That's a deep cut.
That's a very deep cut. Yeah.
Yeah.
from the Bill Bixby show. But yeah, I mean, the people at the time were sort of, ugh, and even Ben Affleck hates his performance in it too. But I don't really get why. Like, I think he matched the tone of this movie, which is really one of the things that's hard to do in these kind of things is when you're all making the same movie, and that's I feel like all these people are in the same. Like you look at something like Jupiter Ascendant, and every actor in that is in a different movie, and they just have to like sort of stitch them together. But everyone here seemed to be on the same page, which I guess is a testament to Mark Steven Johnson.
True confession time. I am not really a Ben Affleck fan.
What?
And I'm really not.
This is how we find out?
Frankly, I find the guy to be annoying. I find him...
Yeah, you think you know somebody.
The only role I like him in is in the movie Mallrats because I like to hate him.
Oh, you like him as a villain. So even like
he was the man in Dog.
I don't want to take this down a huge tangent, but you don't like Batffleck?
I don't.
Okay,
but
interesting.
I will say this. I really didn't mind him in this movie. I
didn't mind.
Wow.
High praise. Hey, that's praise.
I'll say, damn the fake praise. Go ahead.
No, but apart from the fact that I don't care for the man personally, I really don't have anything bad to say about him in this movie. I will say in particular, I do enjoy the scenes where he is basically just living as a single blind man, and we see him living his daily routine. We see him getting his money out and folding the 10s one way and the 5s another way. Mm-hmm. And we see his awesome lock opening skills. But I really don't have anything bad to say about him in this movie. I'm only kind of sad because after this movie, he said that by playing a superhero in Daredevil, I have inoculated myself from ever playing another superhero. Mm-hmm. Wearing a costume was a source of humiliation for me and something I would not want to do again. So
I feel really bad that he apparently had a really bad experience. And from the behind the scenes, it doesn't look like it was during the shooting. It seems to be the response that came afterwards that was really that really affected him deeply.
Which, like Ocean said, is weird because we didn't really hear that much criticism about him in particular.
Yeah.
Or was it you that said that? I don't
know. Not him.
No,
in particular,
yeah. Ocean was talking when he's in the reviews. Like they were.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, not a lot of him in particular. I think that there's possibly the negative reaction of the movie itself is going to get put on him some, and then also how a lot of people's reaction to this was, well, we can't wait to see the Elektra movie, right? Instead of we want Daredevil 2, we want Elektra 1.
Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. And now that we've had Elektra 1, I wanted Daredevil 2.
Well, this is also the beginnings of the death of Ben Affleck, movement in pop culture. Like, I think maybe he associates it all together because there was a huge period where everyone just decided, oh, no, now we hate you. And they just turned on him.
Exactly.
And it was like probably the worst time in his life. And so I'm guessing that he associates this with that period, which is the worst thing that's ever happened to him. He's about to have the worst 5 years of his life. And this was the start of it. So while we've talked about Elektra and we've talked about Daredevil, I don't want us to transition to the next topic without talking about the fight scene in the park.
You're holding back.
Don't. Because I watch it again and I'm still so confused by this scene. Like, why is it here? What is going on? It seems like a really bad way to keep a secret identity because you're doing it in front of a bunch of people, like out in broad daylight. You're flipping around and showing. I mean, I understand the sentiment of like flirting, but the other problem is, how does he know Elektra can do all of these things? And also, why can Elektra do this? She's the daughter of a socialite. Like, how can she also do backflips and sighs and all that kind of stuff? What do you guys, even watching it now, liking the movie, even in the director's cut, even watching it going, what is going on in this scene?
Well, you get bored when Dad's gone all the time.
I guess so.
I don't know. I guess I think that the problem with the scene is more the way the execution makes you feel, right? Mm-hmm. You know especially for those, for us, right? We came at it from the comic books end, right? So we know Elektra can do those things. We understand you already know enough from the movie without knowing who Elektra is that Matt Murdock can do these things. And so it's just kind of it was a weird kind of campy thing, right? And it's not even campy isn't the right, it's kind of ham-fisted, right? So he follows her around by sense of smell. So you're already on that thin version of, I'm just going to let that go. Okay, so he's already following her that way. She recognizes she's being followed. Then they have the playground scene thing, and then they start kind of almost sparring back and forth at each other, and then they decide to not hold back. Then, for no apparent reason, like 30 third graders show up. Right, and I'll start screaming, fight.
They're in a playground,
but they're on the other side of the fence. So because apparently the elementary school kids can't get on that side of the fence of the playground for whatever reason, and so they have that and everything goes on, and then and the other the other part of it too is that like once they, even though when they're jumping around doing things on the seesaw and everything like that, it's trying to demonstrate and show that they're discovering the athleticism that they each have in each other. When it gets near the end, the kids just disappear, right? And so it's because it's like she says her name, and then like there's a beat, and then they're kind of talking while she's walking back to the car, and you realize, oh, every kid just left, like they're just gone, and so I think that for me anyway, the problem to me is the execution. I think the idea was, hey, these two people are going to kind of discover their secrets of each other in this interesting different way, and just the way it looked and executed it doesn't work as well as it probably should have.
Yeah, I think it was adding the kids just made it that extra level of bizarre.
There's a lot of weird.
Yeah. What'd you think, Ray?
We are coming across this a lot now, Ocean, where we see things in these movies that look cool, but that's exactly what they are. They're just pure entertainment. Otherwise, they make no sense. And I think that's what this is. I think they had something that looked cool. They didn't really have a sensible way of working it in, but they really wanted it in there. They're like, well, sense be damned.
Is this their surfing scene from Escape from L.A.?
Ooh.
Is this that?
Either that or it's their hang gliding scene,
The surfing scene from Escape from LA had a very important plot point. How was he going to get to the Stars Eddy?
Yeah, Map of the
Stars Eddy. Yeah, how was he going to get to Map of the Stars Eddy if he wasn't on that surf? This one, on the other hand, is it's.
This is the meet cute.
It very well could be. It could be that you had to just kind of buy it and go with it, and there was a way to introduce the characters to each other, right? I think that the problem they were probably trying to solve, and this does it in a quick manner, is how do we get these two characters in each other's orbit, right? Because otherwise it doesn't. There's not a lot of other crossover,
And you have to establish that Elektra is a superhero,
right? You have to establish her abilities and stuff like that, and that she can do things. So so I think they had to figure out how to cram that in, and this is what they got to. And I think honestly, the scene might have been better if you took the exact same scene, took it off a playground, and got rid of the kids.
Yes.
Right? Maybe then it's not as weird.
Yeah.
As it turned out to be, but.
Well, real quick, I know we got to start wrapping this up, but just two cast members. I'm not going to go into great detail but two cast members that I just want to mention real quick.
I have two that I want to shout out too. I doubt they're the same two.
Jon Favreau as Foggy Nelson, because I thought he was, great. I thought he was great comedy wise, and also I thought that his chemistry with Matt Murdock was really good. Specifically in the director's cut, whenever they actually get a chance to work together. And the other actor that I want to call out, even though he doesn't have very much to do, is Leland Orser, who plays.
I love Leland Orser.
Always a joy to see him. He plays Wesley Owen Welch in this movie. Such a great bad guy. And he's almost always a bad guy, but I love seeing him in anything. So it's great to see him here. Who did you have, Kyle?
Oh, I want to still talk about Leland Orser just because I love him so much. He's one of my favorite character actors. Like every time he's in something, he's always so good. I was such a mark for him that there was a movie that he was in where It was a I won't say the movie name because I don't want to spoil it for anybody like it was spoiler for me, but because it was a popular movie from the 90s. In case you watch it again, it was about a detective having to solve a crime, and he has an impediment. That was pretty much most of them in the 90s. And so in the trailer, they have the killer's voice. So like they show all the different things going on, and then they have the killer going, "You'll never stop me," and I'm like, hey, that's Leland Orser. And then I watched the movie, and he shows up in the first 5 minutes as the orderly. And I'm like, oh, look, there he is. There's the killer.
Oh, that sucks big time,
right?
man.
Because I'm such a movie nerd. I was like, yeah, it's like, don't put the killer's voice in there, especially when you cast Leland Orser. Come on. No, the two names I was going to talk about were, first of all, Joey Pants, Joe Pantoliano.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he did such a good job as the maybe slightly dirty journalist. Like, you don't really know what his ethics are, but he's sort of the one that is carrying the plot a lot of the time. And also a very young, very unexperienced Ellen Pompeo, who would go on to star in Grey's Anatomy, and I believe is still starring in Grey's Anatomy.
Exactly.
That show that can never die. Like, she was a really good Karen Page, but she only had like 2 scenes.
Yeah, 2 scenes, yeah. But no, well, Grey's Anatomy was smart. She got a nice, stable job 20 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. Everybody dreams of having that kind of stability.
Yeah.
And then just because I'm a Marvel movie nerd and I dig into this kind of stuff, the other 2 names I want to mention are Shauna Duggins and Ron Searles. Those are the stunt doubles. Because whatever Jennifer and Ben couldn't do, Shauna and Ron could. So nice. They do a ton of really cool stuff, and they actually have a bunch of cool behind the scenes stuff. And and Ron has a huge part in the movie because you remember the scene where you see Daredevil like showing off all the stuff that his stick can do, the flipping around. Yeah. That's Ron.
Yeah,
that's not Ben Affleck at all. That's Ron, like in the full costume. And because the costume is so definitive, you can't tell that it's not Ben Affleck because it's just like the chin.
Yeah,
right.
So yeah, that's him doing all of the little flipping around nunchucky kind of things.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
As we wind down here on Silver Linings, one of the things that we always try to take a look at as best as we can is what were the filmmakers' goals in making this film, and were those goals achieved? And that's kind of a loaded question in this case, because we've already talked about the director's cut and how, due to bowing to the studio's demands, so much was changed. So I think that Mark Steven Johnson, as the director, had a lot that he wanted to do, but I would say that at least for the opening theatrical run of this movie, those goals were not achieved because so much of the story that he intended to tell just wound up on the cutting room floor until the director's cut came out. And then at that point, the film had already gotten all the bad reviews. So, I mean, what can you do? Now, you can make the point that he did achieve his goals because now we do have the director's cut. It's available for everyone to see, and it is a significant improvement. But that's what I think. What about you guys?
I think the filmmakers' goals were different. I think that part of the thing about what we're talking about with the difference in the director's cut and the theatrical release was that he wanted to make a movie that would please the studios, and part of all of that is the goal that I think this movie had was to take Daredevil, a lesser known character for sure, and introduce him to a wide audience and make him basically a more known, more beloved character. Now, the movie financially was a huge success. Right, they made it for about $78 million, and actually, I have those numbers right here. I'll just since I'm bringing that point. Yeah, the budget on it was about $78 million, and it grossed $170 million. It was a huge financial success. Now, but what
plus
I think
ancillaries. Plus 2 versions of the DVD that have
exactly. Yeah, plus all that.
That was when DVDs were making money.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's when they were expensive. $20 a pop. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So. But I think that the goal is take this character, make him broad, and make him well known. And I feel that they wildly succeeded in that. And I think you can see the success in that not only in the the common knowledge of this movie, but also that when Netflix was like, we're going to make a Marvel character, television story character, the first one they did was Daredevil, right? And they used Daredevil to introduce the others, and so I think that really does show you that they were wildly successful in making Daredevil much more of a mainstream character than he was.
Absolutely right.
Let's talk about what we thought about this movie. What did we rank it? How did we review it?
Business. That's all it ever is business.
So, for me personally, I use Flickchart, and now you might be a little surprised by this because I'm usually the optimist here. This wound up at a 51% on my Flickchart, yeah. 727 out of 1483. But that's only because there are way more movies that I like on my Flickchart than that I dislike, so it's kind of uneven. On Letterboxd, out of a rating of 5 stars, this is a 3.5 for me, and that's director's cut. Obviously, I think that this is a decent film, and I think that it has more good to it than bad parts. Ocean?
For me, the Flickchart, this movie ranked at 107 out of 409 for me. And so I think that it got to 70%. I believe that's the number. For Letterboxd, I was in the same boat as you in terms of the 3.5 stars. I think that it is to make it to 3 stars, it's a good movie that I will watch multiple times, as I have demonstrated by watching it multiple times. It is enjoyable. It is not perfect. But it is a lot of fun to watch. And so 3.5 stars, and if we were doing Letterboxd, it would have a heart because I like it as well.
Kyle, what would you give this?
I don't use Flickchart, so I guess that would be a 1 out of 1.
So that makes it 100%.
100%.
Wow, Kyle loves this movie.
Right.
Look at that.
By the algorithm, that should be a 5-star movie.
There you go, but it's not. Yeah, I'm pretty much with you, Ray. I'm at 3.5, and I give it a heart too because I have watched it multiple times. When you guys asked me to be on the show, I was happy to watch it again. I own the regular version and the director's cut. I watched the director's cut. Sorry, I didn't mean to. But I like it's sort of like the extended editions of Lord of the Rings. Once you go big, you can't really go back.
Right?
I just couldn't bring myself to do it. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and I think it succeeded at a time that it shouldn't have. Like it's much for you have to understand sort of the era that it came out in. We're sort of spoiled now, but like the only Marvel movies that had been made were Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man. That's it. Like there was no other ones out there. So this being the 4th of those, that's pretty good company to be in. I mean, This same year would see the release of Ang Lee's Hulk. So if you go by like adaptations, it comes out looking pretty good, doesn't it?
Ang Lee's Hulk, though, visually is amazing, but that's where the praise kind of it gets harder after that. But visually, man, does it work.
All right. Well, now comes the moment of truth, our final evaluation, and I'm going to throw it to our guest first. Kyle, do you think this film deserves the bad rap that it gets?
Not at all. I think there's way too much people thinking about Ben Affleck before they actually watch this movie. I think Mark Steven Johnson was a fan who fought hard for as much as he could and made pretty much one of the best fan films ever. Tried to put all of his favorite moments from the comic books that he loved into the movie. Didn't always succeed, but I think there's a lot of heart in this movie, and I think there's a lot of fun, and people need to give it a second chance.
Ocean?
I'm just going to say no, because I cannot frame the reasons for no better than what Kyle just said right there.
And obviously, I'm a big no, too. And I think the number of times I have bought this on disc is just proof. I think I've bought it on DVD twice and Blu-ray once.
I believe I'm there, too, and I believe I bought the digital version as well.
So there you go. So this has been the Silver Linings treatment of Daredevil. Kyle Olsen, thank you so much for joining us here. Is there anything that you want to tell the listeners about?
Well, first of all, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. This was super fun. I like talking about movies that I like and don't have to defend, which is good. Sometimes I feel like I'm, Daredevil's dad. I'm in the corner, like feeling my way out about Daredevil. But yeah, so if you liked what you heard, and I don't know why you would have, you should check out the Marvel Movie Minute. As you hear this, we have launched, so we are discussing Iron Man 2. So if you want to hear my feelings about Jon Favreau, you'll be hearing it for the next 200 hours. So no, they're not an hour long each, they're 15 minutes long each. But so we're going to get deep into every little bit we can about Iron Man 2 and everything that goes along with it. So if you want to come along for the ride, we're happy to have you. And it's not just me. I have a co-host as well, so you won't have to hear this voice.
But you're the important one.
I'm here, so clearly I am the important one.
Exactly. We looked at the Marvel Movie Minute and said this host is the important one, and that's the one we invited.
and Rob also said no.
We're supposed to say that. You can bet we'll be listening to Marvel Movie Minute. Ocean, this has been great with you as well. And it was great talking about this movie again.
Yes, I really enjoyed it, and I think I'd like to also personally thank Kyle for joining us to discuss a movie that is much maligned and very much so should not.
This has been Silver Linings, part of the Next Real family of film podcasts on TrueStory.fm. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and that we may have even inspired you to give this movie a second chance. If you'd like to get more involved with the Next Reel community, visit thenextreel.com/membership. For just $1 a month, you can become a one-reeler and join our online community in our Discord server. And for a few dollars more a month, become a two-reeler supporter and join us for show live streams as we record, early access to shows in your very own personal podcast feed, and access to the super secret member channels in Discord. Plus, you can now support with a single annual donation at either level. Thank you to everyone who's joined us and to all who are checking us out. Your support allows us to keep producing and growing the Next Real family of podcasts here at TrueStory.fm. See you in the next episode.
I love the conversations that so many of our hosts have had on their shows. Steve and JJ on Trailer Rewind, Ray and Ocean on Silver Linings, even Tommy's short-lived Wait, Hear Me Out.
So many listeners want to make sure they've watched the movie before tuning in to any discussion on our podcasts. Well, the best way to watch the movie is to look it up on our watch page.
Our watch page lists all the movies that we have discussed on all the shows from the Next Reel's family of podcasts, including the one you're listening to right now. It's your one-stop shop for Apple and Amazon links where you can rent or buy the movie.
Trailer Rewind movies like Raw,
The Nice Guys,
The Peanut Butter Falcon,
or Free Fire.
No, Wait, Hear Me Out movies like Josie and the Pussycats or Return of the Living Dead.
Or Silver Linings movies like Repo Men, Daredevil, and The Wolfman.
Plus, by using those links to rent or purchase movies, Apple and Amazon will show us a little bit of love, which allows you to support our family of shows with minimal effort.
It's a great way to support the show and find something to watch.
That's right. Head over to thenextreel.com/watch to pick out your next movie and start watching today.